In this episode, we're going to reinforce the language of security, because certifications often test not only what you know, but whether you recognize the vocabulary that security professionals use to describe what they know. When you're brand new, it can feel like every paragraph of security reading contains a dozen abbreviations, and that can make good concepts feel harder than they actually are. The goal here is not to turn you into a walking dictionary, and it is definitely not to encourage shallow memorization with no understanding. Instead, we're going to walk through high-yield acronyms and essential terms you're likely to see around the GIAC GSEC world, and we'll connect each one to a plain language meaning and to the kind of thinking it supports on an exam. You should listen for patterns. Terms that describe confidentiality and access, terms that describe networks and protocols, terms that describe cryptography and identity, and terms that describe operations like logging and incident response. When you hear these terms in context, you'll start to recognize what a question is really asking, which is often the fastest way to get to the right answer. Let's begin with foundational security vocabulary, because it shows up everywhere and it shapes how you reason. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability are often referred to together as the CIA triad, meaning the three core goals that security controls are designed to protect. Confidentiality is about preventing unauthorized disclosure, integrity is about preventing unauthorized change, and availability is about keeping systems and data accessible when needed. You will also see concepts like authentication, authorization, and accounting, sometimes called the AAA model. Authentication is proving identity. Authorization is granting permissions after identity is proven, and accounting is recording actions for oversight and investigation. Another term that matters is non-repudiation, which is the ability to prove an action occurred in a way that a participant cannot credibly deny later. These are not just definitions, they are thinking tools. When an exam question describes a problem, you can often categorize it as primarily impacting confidentiality, integrity, or availability, and then choose controls that match that goal. Now let's talk about identity and access terms that frequently appear in Windows and enterprise discussions. Active Directory, AD, is the directory service used in many Windows environments to manage identities, groups, and policies centrally. Access Control List, ACL, refers to a set of rules attached to a resource that defines who can do what, and it is the mechanism behind many permission decisions. Role-based access control, RBAC, is the practice of granting access based on roles rather than individual people, typically using groups that represent job functions. Least privilege is the principle of giving the minimum access required to perform a task, which reduces damage from mistakes and compromises. Multi-factor authentication, MFA, is requiring more than one factor to authenticate, such as something you know plus something you have. Single sign-on, SSO, is an approach where one authentication event can grant access to multiple services, which can improve usability but concentrates risk if the identity system is compromised. These terms often appear together because identity design is both a usability problem and a security problem. Networking terms can feel especially dense, so it helps to group them by what they do. Transmission Control Protocol, TCP, is a reliable, connection-oriented transport protocol, while User Datagram Protocol, UDP, is a simpler, connectionless transport protocol. Internet Protocol, IP, is the layer that moves packets across networks, and it comes in Internet Protocol version 4, IPv4, and Internet Protocol version 6, IPv6, forms. Domain Name System, DNS, translates names into addresses, which matters because many attacks abuse name resolution to redirect victims. Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, DHCP, assigns network settings automatically, which can be exploited if rogue servers appear. Network Address Translation, NAT, changes address information as traffic crosses boundaries, which affects visibility and access design. Virtual Local Area Network, VLAN, is a way to segment networks at Layer 2, which supports security by reducing who can talk to whom by default. These terms matter because exam questions often hide the core issue inside network behavior descriptions, and recognizing the protocol hints can speed up your reasoning. You will also see terms related to secure communication and remote access, and these often overlap with cryptography concepts. Transport Layer Security, TLS, is the modern protocol used to encrypt many network connections, including web traffic, and it is built on certificates and trust chains. Secure Shell (SSH) provides encrypted remote administration and secure tunneling capabilities, and it is commonly secured using key-based authentication and sometimes MFA. Hypertext Transfer Protocol (HTTP) is the basic web protocol, and Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure (HTTPS) is HTTP layered over TLS. Simple Mail Transfer Protocol (SMTP) relates to email delivery, and email security issues often involve spoofing and authentication checks. Network Time Protocol (NTP) synchronizes time, which is critical for logs and forensics because without correct time, timelines become unreliable. When you see these terms, the exam is often testing whether you understand confidentiality in transit, identity verification, and the role of trust in secure connections. Cryptography vocabulary can seem intimidating, but high-yield terms usually map to a few core ideas. Symmetric encryption uses the same key to encrypt and decrypt, which is fast and efficient for bulk data. Asymmetric encryption uses a key pair, which supports functions like key exchange and digital signatures. A digital signature provides integrity and authentication by proving the signer possessed a private key and that the data was not altered after signing. A hash function produces a fixed-length digest that helps detect changes, and hashing is also used in password storage when combined with salts. A salt is random data added to passwords before hashing to reduce the effectiveness of pre-computed attacks. Public Key Infrastructure (PKI) is the system of certificates, certificate authorities, and trust relationships that supports identity for encryption and signing at scale. Certificate Authority (CA) is the entity that issues certificates, and certificate validation involves checking that the certificate chains to a trusted authority and is within its valid time window. These terms show up because exam questions often test whether you understand when to use encryption, when to use hashing, and how trust is established. Operational security and incident response terms are also high yield because GSEC expects you to understand how security is practiced, not just theorized. Security Information and Event Management (SIEM) is a system that collects and correlates logs to help detect and respond to incidents. Endpoint Detection and Response (EDR) refers to tools and practices that monitor endpoints for suspicious behavior and support investigation. Indicators of compromise (IOC) are artifacts that suggest an intrusion, like suspicious hashes, domains, or file paths, while indicators of attack (IOA) focus more on behavior patterns. Incident Response (IR) refers to the structured process of preparing for, detecting, containing, eradicating, and recovering from security incidents. Forensics refers to collecting and analyzing evidence in a way that supports reliable conclusions, and chain of custody is the record that shows evidence was handled properly. Logging and auditing are the mechanisms that create evidence trails, and retention is how long logs are kept, which matters because short retention can erase evidence before you discover an incident. These concepts are tested because defenders need to move from detection to proof to recovery with discipline. You'll also hear a cluster of terms around malware and common attack techniques, which often appear in scenario questions. Malware is a broad category for malicious software, and it includes viruses, worms, and trojans, each with different propagation and behavior patterns. Ransomware is malware that encrypts or locks data to extort payment, and it often relies on access and privilege misuse. Phishing is a social engineering technique that attempts to trick users into revealing credentials or running malicious content. Privilege escalation is gaining higher permissions than initially granted, and lateral movement is moving from one system to another within a network after initial compromise. Persistence refers to techniques that allow an attacker to maintain access over time, and defense evasion refers to attempts to avoid detection, such as disabling logging or blending into legitimate tools. Denial of service, often shortened as DOS, is an attempt to reduce availability, while distributed denial of service, DDoS, uses many sources to amplify the attack. Recognizing these terms helps you quickly identify what stage of an attack a question describes and which controls are most relevant. Finally, it helps to remember that terms are useful because they compress meaning, and the exam rewards you for unpacking that meaning correctly. When you see an acronym like AD, ACL, TLS, SIEM, or EDR, the real question is what security problem it relates to, what control type it represents, and what trade-offs come with it. If you keep the core categories in mind, identity and access, network and protocols, cryptography and trust, and operations and response, you can place most terms into a bucket and reason from there. This also reduces test anxiety because unfamiliar acronyms become less scary when you can infer their purpose from context and from the surrounding terms. The best way to treat this glossary is as a map of concepts rather than a memorization list, because each term is a doorway into a security idea you already understand. That is why this is the last question in your list, and it is meant to leave you with a clearer, calmer sense of the language you're going to see as you continue your GSEC journey.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.